Sandy Cheeks. She's strong, she's smart, she's a criminal. It's time to expose everyone's favorite violent underwater squirrel and put her in her place, jail. In pre-hibernation week, Sandy prepares for her hibernation by being totally inconsiderate and doing everything in her power to physically harm SpongeBob. The episode starts with Sandy preparing for hibernation by raking leaves in her tree dome. SpongeBob, of course, can't help but try and help her out with his tiny little rake, but he's not making anywhere near the kind of progress that she is. And if there's one thing Sandy cannot tolerate, it's uselessness. Sandy gets so frustrated about him holding her back that she tells SpongeBob to go and find another task.
Then go scrape the salt lick or something.
She only has 168 hours before she enters hibernation, and she has a long and honestly insane list of things she wants to do first. But SpongeBob can't just walk away. He offers to spend all of his free time to help her complete her list. Well, Sandy cannot turn the offer down, but man, is she gonna wish she could. SpongeBob quickly discovers that all of Sandy's activities are extremely dangerous, borderline life-ending stunts like sandboarding, knocking each other off the sea needle with giant ear cleaners, and playing Find the Hay in the Needle Stack, which sounds more like a saw trap than a game. SpongeBob is battered and broken, barely escaping death on multiple occasions, and he eventually realizes that he cannot keep up with his psychopathic friend. So he does what any normal person would. He goes into hiding, taking refuge under Patrick's rock to avoid further dangerous activities. Or I guess to put it another way, to avoid getting killed. But when Sandy can't find him, she panics. Immediately, she organizes the whole town of Bikini Bottom into a search party. Sandy forces the townspeople to search for SpongeBob in extremely dangerous places that he would never venture into, like sulfur fields and leech farms. But as the days go by and no success is made, the search party gets tired. Sandy, however, does not. She refuses to give them a break, even pressuring them to send their kids into tight spaces to help. I mean, she is crossing every single line imaginable. With everyone too scared to confront her, the townsfolk try tricking Sandy, finding objects that resemble SpongeBob. But she catches on fast. While she's inspecting one of the decoys, the whole town sneaks away to hide under Patrick's rock with SpongeBob. But Sandy's search leads her to start destroying the city. Concerned about what's going on, the townsfolk accidentally expose SpongeBob. But Sandy isn't angry. She rushes over, embraces him in a tight hug, and starts dragging him off to their next insane adventure, whether he wants it or not. Very consensual, very considerate of her. But SpongeBob can't cope. He begs Sandy to stop and listen, telling her he can no longer handle these kinds of crazy games, but that he still wants to remain her friend. And just as he finishes his heartfelt plea, SpongeBob notices Sandy has fallen fast asleep. Relieved and exhausted, SpongeBob collapses next to her, sleeping peacefully. When Patrick returns from a grocery trip, he finds the townspeople hiding under his rock and shouts in confusion, "Who are you people?" I don't know, Patrick, but PTSD is now post-traumatic Sandy disorder, so I wouldn't raise your voice around them. Survival of the Idiots unleashes the true Sandy, the terrifying beast lurking behind her curious appearance. The episode begins with SpongeBob and Patrick rushing to visit Sandy, only to find her tree dome covered with a metal shield and a "keep out" sign. Surely she knows that these two would never be able to take the hint. Outside her dome, they find a TV playing a video message from Sandy, who is dressed for bed and binge-eating acorns. She explains that she's hibernating for the winter and warns everyone, especially SpongeBob, not to disturb her. Really tempting them to just ignore you now, Sandy. Yep, Patrick ignores the warning and opens the door, revealing that Sandy's dome is now a winter wonderland with snow covering everything. Surely Sandy would have known that they would never listen. SpongeBob and Patrick are delighted by the snow, removing their water helmets and starting to play around. But they hear strange noises from Sandy's treehouse.
SpongeBob, did you hear that?
I think it came from up in Sandy's tree.
And when they go inside to investigate, completely disregarding her instructions, they find her significantly larger due to her acorn binge. She's sleeping well, dreaming of catching the outlaws Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry. Because they are incapable of listening, SpongeBob and Patrick poke and prod her, somehow without waking her, but their noisy antics eventually rouse Sandy. In her sleepy stupor, Sandy assaults the duo before falling back asleep. And now, it's kind of starting starting to feel like she planned this whole thing. I mean, to tease them with a "don't do this" warning? Come on, man. This is a trap. Patrick makes a pair of earmuffs from his belly button lint, which SpongeBob places on Sandy to keep her from waking again. The two then leave to continue their snow-filled fun, pretending to be the outlaws from Sandy's dream. But when a fight breaks out over who gets to play Dirty Dan, they make even more noise, causing Sandy's earmuffs to fall off. Hearing the commotion, Sandy wakes up in a rage and attacks them once again, even ripping off part of Patrick's head. I think it's pretty obvious that Sandy planned all of this as an excuse to assault, torment, and apparently behead the two of them, right? This is basically a hostage situation. As the winter storm inside the tree dome intensifies, the injured SpongeBob and Patrick attempt to leave but find the door frozen shut from the cold. Trapped in the cold until spring, they grow desperate. SpongeBob tries to take bark from Sandy's tree, but her sleep-talking threatens to put him in an iron lung.
You're gonna be wearing an iron lung when I'm through with you, pinhead.
Making him put the bark back. Out of options, they decide to enter Sandy's room and do the unthinkable. They strip off her fur to use as winter clothing, which crosses a big line, but honestly, if she did trap them in here on purpose, then she kinda had it coming. Dressed in Sandy's fur, SpongeBob declares that they're ready for the long, cold winter, but to their surprise, winter immediately ends. Sandy wakes up, now slimmed down after her hibernation, and looks out the window to see SpongeBob and Patrick wearing her fur. Initially confused, Sandy looks down at herself, realizes she's completely furless, and screams in horror. Her shock quickly turns to anger as she confronts the duo. For punishment, Sandy forces SpongeBob and Patrick to stay in her home and serve as her new spring coat by tying their bodies around her to keep her warm until her fur grows back. They sit uncomfortably while Sandy drinks lemonade, dismayed at the consequences of their actions. If only they had known that Sandy conjured the entire thing up to hold them hostage, torment and abuse them, maybe they wouldn't have gone inside. No, they would. If you thought Sandy was terrifying before, just wait until you see her commit a borderline genocide in Squirrel Jelly. The episode begins at Goo Lagoon as Sandy, SpongeBob, and Patrick complete over simple activities like eating and playing basketball. But Sandy can't just play a game. She's extremely competitive. Too competitive. That intense competitiveness annoys everyone, prompting SpongeBob and Patrick to escape to Jellyfish Fields for something more peaceful jellyfishing. But no, she can't let them have that one. Sandy wants to join in, but of course her approach to the sport is too extreme for SpongeBob and Patrick, as she tries to make jellyfishing into a competition. While they prefer the relaxing catch-and-release method, Sandy quickly becomes bored and looks for ways to make the game more exciting. And what better way to amp up a game than some good old-fashioned steroids? Sandy feeds the jellyfish Frankenstein fish food, causing them to grow giant and aggressive. While Sandy thrives on the added challenge and the roided-up jellies, SpongeBob and Patrick suffer numerous injuries as per usual. Her competitive streak reaches new heights as she dons a supersuit and vows to catch all the jellyfish, going on a chaotic and violent rampage. She succeeds, but the cost is high. Her actions mean that no jellyfish are left in Jellyfish Fields, and she has destroyed the landscape with her reckless use of rocket boots. But hey, the jelly's muscles have muscles, and her ego is bigger than Texas. Realizing the extent of her actions, Sandy begins to reflect and feels guilty about what she did. Determined to change, she meditates and practices non-violence to calm her mind and become more peaceful, which, let's be clear, is the bare minimum. However, as Sandy is meditating, SpongeBob and Patrick lead a giant jellyfish monster formed by the merging of all the captured roided-up jellyfish to her tree dome. The monster begins to attack, but Sandy, sticking to her new pacifist approach, tries to subdue it with non-violent techniques. Unsurprisingly, her peaceful methods don't work, and the monster continues its rampage. It really feels like the problem is just her. Eventually, Sandy's competitive and aggressive side resurfaces, and she realizes that force is the only way to defeat the jellyfish monster. So she engages it in battle, using her violent temperament against it. After several attempts to bring the creature down, she finally succeeds by entering the monster's body and beating it up from the inside, causing it to explode into thousands of regular regular jellyfish. The episode ends with Sandy, SpongeBob, and Patrick back at Jellyfish Fields. Having learned her lesson, Sandy now approaches jellyfishing with a more laid-back attitude. However, her temper briefly flares when she's stung by a jellyfish. So basically, she's learned nothing and this whole episode was pointless. That's a crime in itself. This episode begins with SpongeBob waxing his pet snail Gary when a mailman arrives at his house to deliver a videotape. SpongeBob eagerly plays the tape, which announces that he has been crowned the King of Karate and invites him to Karate Island for his coronation. Excited, SpongeBob prepares to leave but runs into Sandy. When he tells her about the title, Sandy is suspicious and decides to accompany him on the boat ride to the island. In actuality, Sandy is extremely jealous that SpongeBob, and not her, would get such an award. Upon arriving at Karate Island, they are greeted by Master Udon, the sensei in charge. Udon warmly welcomes SpongeBob but pointedly ignores Sandy. SpongeBob, eager to prove his skills, asks to fight Master Udon's best guards. 3 guards appear, and though SpongeBob seems to defeat them easily, Sandy notices something strange. SpongeBob didn't actually touch them, heightening her suspicion. Nevertheless, SpongeBob is crowned King of Karate and proudly sits on his throne. When Sandy warns him that something feels off, SpongeBob accuses her of being jealous, and Sandy leaves frustrated. Interesting enough, she would rather leave SpongeBob to potentially be harmed than fight for her beliefs. Shortly after, SpongeBob finds himself trapped in the throne as Udon pulls out a pen, revealing that something sinister is happening. SpongeBob cries for help, and Sandy, having left, hears his pleas and rushes back, now dressed in a yellow jumpsuit. She begins to battle through Master Udon's tower, encountering various opponents of the 4 floors of fear. For once, she has a legitimate chance to bust out her love of assaulting others. Each opponent uses bizarre tactics. One tries to tickle her, another attempts to kiss her, and one overwhelms her with a foul stench. Using jelly-filled donuts, a hairdryer, and her air helmet, Sandy outsmarts them all and makes her way to the top floor. There, Sandy finds SpongeBob trapped, and Udon reveals his true intentions. The entire King of Karate title was a scam designed to lure SpongeBob to the island. Karate Island is actually Condo Island, and Udon is a real estate agent. His plan is to convince SpongeBob to buy a timeshare condo, allowing his equity to grow until he becomes king of condos. Udon refuses to let SpongeBob go unless he agrees to the purchase. I'm gonna be honest, this is such a low-stakes plan that a court of law would almost definitely argue Sandy did not act in self-defense, but just beat up a bunch of lowly employees. Before Udon can go any further, Sandy breaks out of a bamboo cage Udon had her trapped in by using meditation, odd hand movements, and chanting. Udon removes his robes, revealing a muscular body, while Sandy rips off her jumpsuit, revealing a similarly impressive wrestler-like build. The two engage in a fierce battle but miss each other in their charges. Sandy ultimately defeats Udon by kicking him out of the room and into the water below, freeing SpongeBob. Let me rephrase that. Sandy murders a businessman because SpongeBob is not really capable of saying no. That's more accurate. As they leave the island, SpongeBob apologizes to Sandy for being rude, and she forgives him, saying that's what friends are for. SpongeBob asks if he isn't the true King of Karate after all, but Sandy reassures him that he is in her eyes. As they sail away, she begins explaining the basics of real estate to him. Meanwhile, Squidward arrives on Clarinet Island to be crowned King of Clarinets, only to fall for the same scam with Master Udon still alive and in charge. Okay, so Sandy's charge is attempted murder, but it's still pretty bad. Up next, Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm, an episode that offers Sandy's narcissism and self-delusion in its purest form. The episode opens as a mysterious creature wreaks havoc in Bikini Bottom during the night, taking huge bites out of everything, including SpongeBob's pineapple house. SpongeBob wakes up just in time to glimpse the monstrous culprit, the Alaskan bullworm. That pesky beast again. The following day at the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob tells the townspeople about the worm, and they share similar stories of destruction, realizing they need a plan to protect themselves from the beast. Well, unfortunately, Mr. Krabs has a plan, trying to capitalize on the chaos by selling Krabby Patties. Okay, not a plan, a scam. But the crowd angrily shuts him down for being off topic. Various ideas are thrown around, but none are practical. Patrick suggests pushing the entire town to a safer location, an idea that Squidward quickly dismisses. Sandy reveals that the worm has eaten part of her tail and declares that she will take on the worm herself herself to get her tail back. While the crowd cheers her on, SpongeBob is terrified for Sandy's safety and begs her to reconsider. But of course, you can't convince Sandy of anything. She's going, and SpongeBob chases after her, worried for her well-being. The townspeople are desperate enough to decide that Patrick's idea might be their best bet after all, which, man, that's rock bottom. So they begin physically pushing the town to a new location. Meanwhile, SpongeBob catches up to Sandy and repeatedly tries to dissuade her from fighting the worm, but she's too confident in her abilities, even demanding that SpongeBob admit that no creature is too dangerous for her to handle. Well, except for Modesty. She doesn't want to confront that. Despite SpongeBob's pleas, Sandy continues and the two eventually reach a large, moist cave where Sandy believes the worm lives. Against SpongeBob's protests, Sandy charges into the cave and ties the wriggling creature in a knot, proudly reclaiming her tail. She thinks she's won, but SpongeBob timidly points out that the beast she defeated is not the Alaskan bullworm, it's merely its tongue. As Sandy processes this realization, the cave reveals itself as the worm, complete with blinking eyes and massive teeth. The two flee with the giant worm hot on their heels. During the chase, SpongeBob insists that Sandy admit he was right, which she does begrudgingly. As they try to escape, Sandy cleverly uses a paperclip and string to swing themselves out of the worm's path, causing the worm to tumble off a cliff. The two congratulate themselves, believing they've defeated the creature. Seriously, does nobody ever learn? Unbeknownst to them, the townspeople have moved the entire city to the bottom of that very cliff. Just as they celebrate their relocation, the worm falls directly onto the town, crushing it. The episode ends with the worm's faint ouch as the ruined city lies beneath it. But Sandy's ego is very much intact, even with all of the murdered residents below. Our next episode, Rodeo Days, brings Sandy back home to her native Texas to do what she does best: torment animals. The episode begins with SpongeBob and Patrick having a staring contest when a bottle suddenly falls from the sky and gets lodged in SpongeBob's forehead. It's addressed to Sandy. The two of them head to her tree dome but can't work out how to open her door. Sandy suddenly karate chops the door open and accidentally knocks the letter out of the bottle when she hits SpongeBob and Patrick. First of all, kinda rude to just be smashing doors left and right, but hitting SpongeBob and Patrick feels like a pattern at this point. Sandy reads the letter, revealing it's from her twin brother, Randy, informing her that the rodeo is in town. She explains that she has to return to Texas to defend her rodeo title. But SpongeBob and Patrick have no idea what a rodeo is, forcing her to sing a song to explain the concept. That's more or less the only way these two learn anything. But SpongeBob and Patrick grow increasingly worried about the dangers of a rodeo, especially the mention of rodeo clowns, which horrifies SpongeBob. He's a clown in life, but he's terrified of actual clowns. Convinced that rodeos are too dangerous, SpongeBob tries to stop Sandy from going, but she's determined to defend her title. Her suit transforms into a rocket, and she blasts off to Texas. Still worried for her safety, SpongeBob tries to convince Patrick to help him save Sandy, but Patrick is too useless to help him. So SpongeBob then takes matters into his own hands by capturing the citizens of Bikini Bottom and Super Bubbles while they're sleeping, forcing them to join his rescue mission. There's one for SpongeBob's rap sheet. When they wake up in SpongeBob's house, Squidward is furious and tries to leave, only to fall when he realizes that SpongeBob's entire pineapple house is floating in a bubble too. The rest of the group also steps out and falls, but they're soon transported to Texas, where Sandy is competing in the rodeo riding a bullfrog. SpongeBob calls out to her, which distracts her and causes her to fall off, losing the rodeo. The bullfrog then jumps at SpongeBob's bubble, popping it. Now Sandy has to rescue SpongeBob from the bullfrog, but she's furious at him for causing her to lose her winning streak. And as we know, Sandy does not react well to losing. She tells him to leave the rodeo to her next time, to which SpongeBob sheepishly responds, "Ah, nuts. Probably for the best. Cowboy SquarePants doesn't quite have the same ring to it." Up next, To Save a Squirrel, an episode that sees Sandy bringing SpongeBob and Patrick to join her on a terrifying camping trip. The episode begins with SpongeBob and Patrick in a panic, running and screaming about being chased by a beast. Fortunately, they bump into Sandy, who reveals that the so-called beast is actually just a harmless cricket from the surface. They notice that Sandy is packing a Jeep with camping gear, food, water, tents, and even dynamite, a classic for old family camping trips. Sandy explains that she's heading out on a dangerous wilderness camping trip. SpongeBob and Patrick want to join, but Sandy refuses, believing that the camp is too dangerous for them. Still, they they sneak into her Jeep without her knowledge. As Sandy drives off, SpongeBob and Patrick fall out of the Jeep, luckily taking some of the camping supplies with them. Now stranded in the wilderness, they decide to set up camp. SpongeBob starts pitching the tent while Patrick is put in charge of making a campfire. However, when SpongeBob finishes the tent, he discovers that Patrick has accidentally burned their food instead of starting a fire. In a frantic attempt to put out the flames, Patrick uses the tent, but of course that only sets the tent on fire. Eventually he pours water on it, successfully extinguishing the fire, but now they're left with no food, no water, and no shelter. Great job, guys. A+ Bear Grylls stuff here. Patrick insists it's his turn to come up with a plan, but after a long pause, he only suggests playing hide and seek.
Do you want to play hide and go seek?
Which, I don't know if you know, is not a plan. While searching for a place to hide, they come across a cave and decide to spend the night there. Inside the cave, an old man appears and claims that the cave is their new home. He tells them he's been living there for 40 years and insists there's no escape from the valley. If ever there was a reason to run. As they try to settle in, SpongeBob becomes paranoid, convinced that Patrick is plotting to eat him. The old man encourages SpongeBob to eat Patrick first before Patrick gets to him. So, of course, SpongeBob and Patrick try to eat each other over and over. But then, and get ready for this, the old man reveals that he is actually Sandy in disguise. Yes, our good old Sandy Cheeks just casually trying to inspire her friends into cannibalism. She explains that their entire ordeal was a test of their survival skills, and she awards them with survival badges. But SpongeBob and Patrick, still in a hunger-crazed state, turn their attention to Sandy pulling out a bottle of ketchup. Sandy flees the scene, vowing to bring more granola next time. I mean, nothing teaches you a lesson like having a bite taken out of your thigh. Welcome to Flea in Her Dome, a borderline horror episode where Sandy basically dooms all of Bikini Bottom due to poor hygiene. The episode begins with SpongeBob and Patrick feeling down because Sandy has gone to Texas for a 2-day science convention. To pass the time, they prepare a grand welcome home party for her. When Sandy returns, however, they notice she's scratching and biting at her fur, which seems strange. She never seemed to have rabies before. Sandy explains that she accidentally brought a flea back from Texas and asks SpongeBob to fetch the flea collar from her briefcase. Before Sandy can stop it, the flea leaps out of her fur and bites SpongeBob, causing him to grab the flea collar. But then the flea jumps onto Patrick and bites him, leading to a fight between the two over who should get to wear the collar. Eventually, Sandy wraps the collar around all three of them, but to their horror, the flea multiplies rapidly, rendering the collar ineffective. Soon, fleas infest the entire tree dome, trapping SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy inside with no way to escape. As the situation worsens, Patrick blames Sandy for bringing the flea back from Texas, while SpongeBob blames himself for throwing the party in the first place, leading to a fight between the two friends. Seeing the futility of arguing, Sandy steps in and reminds them that they need to work together to escape the infestation. Who would have thought that teamwork would be the thing to save the day? Patrick then suggests building a tower to the tree, but his plan turns out to be foolish when he simply grabs an apple instead of coming up with a solution. Frustrated, Sandy decides they must take refuge in the tree, but the fleas continue to spread, and it seems like there's no escape. But then, suddenly, SpongeBob mentions living in a sea of fleas instead of salt water, which gives Sandy an idea. She floods the entire tree dome with salt water, drowning the fleas and saving the day. However, as the episode ends, it's revealed that many of the Bikini Bottom citizens are also trapped inside the dome. SpongeBob cheerfully remarks that it's good to have Sandy back, despite the fact that, everyone is trapped presumably for all eternity. Sandy basically created hell in Bikini Bottom. Pressure shows Sandy at her worst, willing to get her friends killed purely to avoid losing. She's a pretty terrible winner, and even worse when she loses. The episode begins with Sandy and SpongeBob relaxing, watching clouds, when a playful conversation turns competitive because Sandy's incapable of doing anything but competing with others. They discuss their abilities and soon challenge each other to a race up Coral Cliff. Sandy takes an early lead due to her land-based skills, easily winning. SpongeBob, determined to prove himself, suggests another race to the Krusty Krab. This time, he takes the same head start that Sandy had earlier and manages to win, arguably proving that Sandy is annoying. Frustrated by her loss, Sandy boasts about how much better land creatures are than sea creatures, listing the many abilities she believes sea creatures lack. SpongeBob, along with Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs, points out all of the things Sandy cannot do, such as breathing underwater. In her frustration, Sandy removes her suit and helmet to prove her toughness, but soon struggles without air. She improvises by using a pickle jar as a helmet. For someone so proud of her intelligence, it's a pretty stupid thing to do. In retaliation, Sandy challenges the group to survive on land for 1 minute, which they confidently accept. Okay, so they're as stupid as she is, and she's willing to kill them just to avoid admitting defeat. However, upon reaching the shore, they begin to doubt themselves. Unwilling to back down, they push forward and end up enjoying their time on land.
Hey, this isn't so bad.
They even chat with 2 native seagulls, feeling quite proud of their achievement.
Hey, it's a local. Hi, we're from underwater. Do you know Sandy Cheeks?
After their minute is up, Sandy comes to congratulate them, only to find the seagulls attacking her friends. Horrified, she leaps into action, calling the birds rats with wings.
Rats with wings? Hey!
And successfully rescues SpongeBob and the others. The least she could do, honestly. Back on the ocean floor, Sandy and SpongeBob apologize to each other. They realize that both sea and land creatures have unique strengths, even if no one excels at everything. The defeated seagulls, now missing many feathers, half-heartedly join in the cheer from above. You just know they mostly wanted to eat Sandy. I hear sore losers taste pretty bitter. The episode Texas follows Sandy's plan to leave Bikini Bottom and go back home. If only her violent, unhinged rage would let her leave. The episode begins at Goo Lagoon, where SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy play in the sand. Sandy carves a sand sculpture of Texas, but the good tide soon washes it away. The homesick Sandy walks off in sadness. SpongeBob tries to cheer her up, but Sandy explains that she's missing her home in Texas. SpongeBob and Patrick, hoping to lift her spirits, blindfold her and take her to her tree dome because nothing cheers people up more than kidnapping. But instead of helping, this only deepens Sandy's homesickness, and she bursts into tears before running off. Confused, SpongeBob and Patrick hear Sandy singing from the top of her tree dome about how much she misses Texas. Determined to make Sandy feel better, SpongeBob and Patrick decide to throw her a Texas-themed party at the Krusty Krab. They go to invite Sandy, but she announces that she's moving back to Texas. SpongeBob tries to convince her to come to the Krusty Krab, but Sandy refuses and boards the bus to leave Bikini Bottom. Shame they can't just kidnap her again. As she leaves, Patrick insults Texas, calling it dumb and asking what's so great about it.
Yeah. What's so great about dumb old Texas?
This immediately causes the bus to screech to a halt, and Sandy storms back, furious. She confronts Patrick, who then asks if it's okay to say the people from Texas are dumb, enraging her even more. I mean, come on, angering someone with anger issues is not exactly the greatest idea. This gives SpongeBob an idea. They can lure Sandy to the Krusty Krab by continuing to insult Texas. Guess they didn't listen to me then. SpongeBob and Patrick start mocking Texas, provoking Sandy to attack them in a blind fury with the plan to lead her right to the surprise party. Patrick continues to hurl insults at Texas, but quickly realizes that Sandy is much faster than they thought. Sandy lassos Patrick and pulls him in, creating a nuclear explosion effect as he disappears. SpongeBob, trying to reach the Krusty Krab in time, runs for his life with Sandy hot on his heels. Just as SpongeBob reaches the Krusty Krab's door, Sandy lassos him, pulling him back. However, SpongeBob holds on to the door with his pinky finger, causing the front of the building to rip off, revealing the surprise party inside. The crowd greets Sandy with a warm "Howdy, y'all!" Touched by the gesture, Sandy realizes that home isn't just about Texas barbecues or pecan pies, but about how much her friends care about her. She decides to stay in Bikini Bottom, recognizing that her true home is with her underwater friends. The crowd cheers, except for Squidward, who remains indifferent. But then that's just him. Just as things seem to settle, Patrick insults Texas again, angering Sandy, and he nervously asks if he should start running once more as the episode ends.
Yeah, who needs dumb old Texas?
What did you just say?
Should I start running now?
Yes, Patrick, yes you should. And now, an episode that sees Sandy once again refusing to bring her friends into her adventures, and in turn, dooming them. Sandy's Rocket. The episode begins with SpongeBob visiting Sandy's tree dome and discovering she has built a rocket ship. Sandy explains that she plans to go to the moon for a science mission. Excited, SpongeBob begs to join her, but Sandy initially refuses, saying that the trip is for research, not fun. Although she doesn't actually explain what she's researching, which is strange. After much persistence, she agrees to let SpongeBob come along. Sandy also shows him a pop gun that shoots nets, which she plans to use for collecting moon rocks. SpongeBob, however, becomes fascinated with the idea of using the gun to hunt aliens, no matter how much Sandy insists that aliens do not exist. Although talking space squirrels and sea sponges, of course, do. Later that night, Patrick visits SpongeBob and gives him alien repellent, and together they sneak into Sandy's rocket to spray it all over the windows. But while inside, Patrick accidentally triggers the rocket's controls and the two launch into space. The rocket orbits the moon a few times, but ultimately crashes back in Bikini Bottom. However, SpongeBob and Patrick mistakenly believe they've landed on the moon and are convinced that the inhabitants of Bikini Bottom are actually aliens trying to trick them. So what do? They begin capturing everyone in town using Sandy's net guns. Damn it, Sandy, all you had to do was let them go with you. Eventually, they've captured all the citizens of Bikini Bottom, and when Sandy eventually finds out what they're doing, she's furious at them for ruining her experiment. But SpongeBob and Patrick are still convinced she's an alien, and they capture her too. When she tries to explain that they never actually left Earth, they slam the rocket's door in her face in outrage, but paranoia quickly takes hold, leading SpongeBob and Patrick to suspect that the other is also an alien. Patrick, in a panic, accidentally shoots himself with the net gun. Well, at least it's family-friendly enough for YouTube guidelines. Deciding to return home from the moon, SpongeBob restarts the rocket, but it runs out of gas and crashes, this time actually landing on the moon. Looking out the window, SpongeBob realizes his mistake when he sees Earth in the distance. As the episode ends, the Bikini Bottomites who had been captured in the cargo hold address SpongeBob, sarcastically calling themselves aliens and saying, "SpongeBob, we aliens would like a word with you." And to think, if only Sandy was open to going into space with SpongeBob, maybe the little yellow guy would have survived. Probably not, actually.
Uh-oh.
But hey, I'm just a guy who likes cartoons, so I'll return to my shows. I'll catch you in the next video.